The sky was red with fire, as smoke rose from the ground, and screams filled the air, while human soldier Jacob ran through the battlefield, with dust in his mouth and fear in his chest. He had never seen a war like this before, not even on Earth. The enemy was not human, and the weapons were sharp glowing things that hissed when they cut through the air, and the soldiers beside him kept falling one by one, but he kept running, trying to find cover, or someone still standing. He saw her then across the field, an alien warrior girl with silver hair and deep violet skin lying on her side, her breath short, her arm bleeding, and her eyes wide. She was not like the others who attacked him. She looked like one of the proud ones from the allied clans. Her armor cracked and one of her blades lay beside her, shining like a star. The battle kept roaring around them, but Jacob's eyes stayed locked on her. She was alone, and the raiders were closing in, 3 of them with metal claws and no mercy. He looked at the blade on the ground. It called to him in a strange way, as if the weapon itself had a voice deep in his mind. No one else dared go near it. Some shouted for him to stop. Others screamed that the blade was cursed, that it belonged to her clan and no outsider should touch it. But he did not stop. He did not think. He just moved. He slid down beside her, grabbed the hilt, and pulled it free. The blade felt warm and heavy, and the moment he held it, the air around him changed, like the wind had frozen for a second. The enemy came close, and he swung the blade with both hands, not knowing how he did it, but his body moved on its own. The blade cut through the first raider with ease, then the second and the third, all gone within moments. He turned to the girl, her lips parted in shock, her eyes locked on the sword in his hand. Her voice came out soft but strong like thunder, hidden under a whisper. "You should not have touched it." She said, "That blade is the soul blade of my bloodline. And now you have drawn it. You have claimed the right of bond." Jacob blinked, his breath heavy, his hand still tight on the sword. "I only wanted to help," he said, but she did not smile. She looked at the blade, then at his hand, then at her own. A strange light shimmered on her skin, forming a mark that looked like 2 circles. Joined together, the same mark appeared on his hand, glowing blue before fading into his skin like ink beneath the surface. The ground shook again as more raiders charged forward, and Jacob helped her up. She leaned on him, weak but standing, and he could feel her strength returning little by little, as if the bond had passed something between them. When the fight ended and the dust began to settle, the rest of her clan appeared. Tall figures in gold and black armor, their faces hidden but their eyes glowing. One elder stepped forward, looked at Jacob, and bowed deeply. "You have drawn the blade of Soraya, daughter of the High Flame, and heir to the warrior path," he said. "By the law of the old stars, you are now her mate in blood and in spirit." Jacob froze. Soraya looked away, her face unreadable, her body tense. He wanted to speak, to say this was a mistake, that he did not mean for any of this to happen, but no words came out of his mouth. The elder placed one hand on Jacob's shoulder and nodded slowly. "You cannot walk away from this. Now the blade has chosen, and so has the bond behind the elder." Others began to chant soft words in a language Jacob did not know, but it wrapped around him like wind and fire, and his legs felt heavy like stone. He looked at Soraya again, her violet eyes locked on his, not with warmth but with storm and silence. "I never wanted a bond," she whispered. "I never wanted a mate, but the blade does not ask. It only binds." The sun dipped lower on the horizon, as shadows stretched across the battlefield, and Jacob stood in the center of it all, holding a blade that did not belong to him, bound to a girl he had never known until today, and deep inside his chest something stirred, something he could not name yet, something that felt like it had already begun long ago. Before the blade, before the war, before this world even knew his name. The silence between them said more than words, and the mark on his hand pulsed once, as if to remind him this was only the beginning. The sky turned cold above the great hill where Jacob stood with the blade still in his hand, and the girl beside him, quiet as stone. Her name was Soraya, and her people now stood around them, their tall forms cloaked in armor and mystery. Some stared in silence, others whispered words Jacob could not understand, but all eyes were on him, not as a guest, not as a hero, but as something more, something bound and chosen by their ancient law. He tried to return the blade, held it out with both hands, and spoke with calm words, saying he did not mean to claim it, that he only wanted to help, that he would give it back and leave if they wished. But the elder shook his head and stepped forward again, his long silver hair flowing in the wind, his voice deep and full of old power. "The bond has been sealed," he said, "once drawn in battle, by one knot of the blood. The soul blade binds itself to the life bonded. It cannot be undone by word or by will. It is written in the stones of our origin, in the stars of our birth." Jacob looked at Soraya. Her eyes held no kindness, only duty and silence. He could see her pain, not from wounds, but from something deeper, something that made her look at him like a stranger who had stolen something sacred without knowing. She turned her back and walked toward the stone camp, where the wounded were taken, leaving him behind. with her people who still watched with guarded hearts. One young warrior stepped close, his face hard with anger, and his hand on his weapon. "You are not one of us," he said, "and yet the blade chose you." "I will never trust it, and I will never trust you." Jacob said nothing, only nodded and lowered his head. The wind picked up, and the mark on his hand glowed again for a moment. Before fading, they brought him to a round tent. Made of black cloth and bone, inside was warm and filled with soft blue light from floating stones. He sat on a mat while others watched from outside, guards perhaps, or watchers. He did not know. He wanted to sleep, but questions filled his mind, questions he could not answer. A small girl entered with food, a bowl of thick soup and flat bread. She said nothing, just placed it before him and left. The scent reminded him of earth, but the taste was sharp and strange. He ate in silence as the night grew deep. Soraya entered at last, her steps slow, her face unreadable. She sat across from him and folded her arms, her eyes never leaving his. "Do you understand what you have done?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. "I did what I had to," he said. "You were going to die." "Then let me die," she snapped. "Better that than be bound to someone who does not know our ways, does not share our blood or path." Jacob stayed still, the soup forgotten beside him. "I did not ask for this," he said, "but I will not run from it." Soraya studied him, her face like carved stone. Then she pulled back her sleeve and showed the mark on her wrist, the same as his two rings joined by a thread of light. It shimmered as she moved. "This mark is not love," she said. "It is law, and law does not care how we feel. It binds, and it breaks all the same." She stood again and turned to leave, but stopped at the tent's edge, her hand resting on the frame. "Tomorrow you will train with us," she said. "If you are to be bound by law, then you must walk as one of us, even if you never belong." Then she was gone, and Jacob sat alone again, the cold creeping in as the stones dimmed and the night grew heavy. He dreamed that night of a blade in fire, of stars falling, and hands reaching for him through smoke and shadows. When he woke, the mark on his hand burned faintly, as if the dream had left a fire behind. The next day came with no warning, only the sound of horns and shouting voices. He was taken to the training field, where Soraya stood with other warriors, her armor clean, her face set like steel. She tossed him a wooden blade and pointed to the circle. "We fight now," she said. "No rules, just movement. Show me if you have fire, or only fear." They clashed in the circle, Wood striking with his arms, shaking her speed unreal, her eyes burning with fury. She knocked him down again and again, but he kept getting back up, bruised and tired. But standing at the end, she looked at him differently, her anger not gone, but changed like storm. Turning to wind, she walked away without a word, and the others watched in silence. Later, as the sun dipped low, Jacob sat by the fire alone, and Soraya came again. This time she did not speak, she only sat beside him, not close, but not far, and they watched the fire together, the flames dancing like whispers between them. And though nothing was said, something had shifted, not broken, not healed, just shifted like stone, moving slow beneath the earth where no one sees, but everything changes. Morning light broke through the tall red trees of the Kyrelian camp while Jacob stood alone on the edge of the stone training ground, his arms sore and his legs weak from the endless drills. His wooden blade rested beside him, but his eyes were not on the weapon, they were on her. Soraya moved across the circle like a storm. Her strikes cleaned her body, flowing with the grace of someone born to fight. She had not spoken to him since their last match, and each day her silence grew heavier. The others had begun to accept his presence, but only barely. Some nodded when they passed him, others ignored him completely. One even spit near his feet, and muttered in their own tongue. Jacob did not answer, did not fight back. He only trained harder, watched longer, tried to understand their way, even if their way did not want him. Soraya had changed since the battle. She trained more than ever, pushed herself beyond her limits. She barely ate, barely slept, the fire in her eyes never fading. Jacob wondered if she was trying to punish herself or him, maybe both. He tried once to speak to her in the water tent, where warriors cleaned their wounds. She turned her head away before he finished his sentence, and walked into the steam. Each night he dreamed of the mark glowing on his hand and hers. The memory of the bond never left his thoughts, like a chain around his heart. Not heavy, but always there. He wondered if she felt it too, or if she had built walls high enough to keep it out one day. During weapons drills, Soraya called him out without warning, her voice sharp across the field, and her eyes cold like ice. She tossed him a real blade this time. No wood, no games. She stepped into the circle, and the others gathered around watching. In silence, the elder stood nearby, arms crossed, his gaze unreadable. "You say you will not run," she said. "Then show me that you can stand." Jacob nodded and raised the blade, his stance shaky, but strong enough. He remembered her movements, how she flowed like water, how she struck like fire. He tried to copy her style, but his body was still human, still clumsy, still learning. They fought with speed and force. Soraya testing him, pushing him, cutting the air with strikes that came close enough to taste. Jacob blocked some, dodged others, his arms trembling under the weight of the blade, but he refused to fall, not this time. The crowd whispered, as the match dragged on, their voices low and full of surprise. No outsider had ever lasted this long against Soraya, not even those who trained for years. Jacob heard none of it, his focus locked on her eyes, her steps, her rhythm. Then it happened. Her blade clashed with his, and locked for just a moment, their faces inches apart, their breath heavy. Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time since the battle, her anger flickered, replaced by something else, something softer. "Why did you not let me die?" she asked, in a voice too low for others to hear. "You could have walked away." "Because I could not," Jacob said, simple and honest. "You were alive and needed help, that was all." She pushed him back, then ended the match, her blade dropping to her side and her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned. "To the others, he will train with us," she said, her voice steady. "He has earned that much." The crowd did not cheer, but some nodded, others looked away, and a few walked off. Without a word, Soraya did not wait for thanks, did not wait for praise. She walked toward the edge of the field, and vanished into the trees. Later that night, Jacob sat near the fire with a bowl of stew in his lap. He ate slowly, thinking of her words, thinking of the moment their blades locked, and the strange look in her eyes, not warmth, not peace, but something close. Soraya arrived, just as the stars began to shine. She sat across from him again. This time with no armor, only a simple wrap, and her hair tied back. She watched the fire for a long time before speaking. "In my people's eyes, the bond is sacred," she said. "It is not meant to be forced, not meant to be taken by accident, and yet here we are." Jacob said nothing, only listened. "You fight like someone who carries more than a blade," she said, "like someone with weight in his heart that he cannot drop." "Maybe I do," Jacob said, "and maybe you do too." She looked at him then, not with anger, not with sorrow, just with quiet eyes, and a breath that sounded like a sigh. "We are not ready for what this means," she said, "but the bond does not wait, it only grows." She stood and walked away again, but this time she paused at the edge of the firelight, and turned back for just a second. Her eyes meeting his. "Sleep well, warrior," she said, then disappeared into the dark, and Jacob sat there, alone but not lonely, the fire warm on his skin, and the mark on his hand pulsing slow and steady, like a heartbeat shared with someone just out of reach, but no longer a stranger. The nights on Corel were longer than on Earth, with stars that blinked like eyes watching from above, and winds that carried voices from the deep forest. Jacob had grown used to the sound of the trees, the distant hum of energy from the soul blade, which now rested in a stone chamber, guarded by Soraya's clan elders. They said the blade slept, but Jacob felt its presence, like a thought in the back of his mind, always silent, always watching. Training had become routine, and the warriors no longer looked at him like an outsider. Not all accepted him, but they no longer challenged his right to stand among them. His bond with Soraya was still unspoken between them, neither warm nor broken, only something that hovered in the space. Between glances and shared breath, they had begun to fight as a pair in sparring matches, learning to read each other's steps without words. And though no smiles passed between them, something had shifted in the way their bodies moved, like waves finding rhythm. But not all were content with this bond. In the high chamber of the old stones, one of the elders, named Herrick, watched Jacob from afar, his mind filled with anger and doubt. He remembered the ancient laws, and how they once protected the purity of the bloodlines. He saw the mark on Jacob's hand, and called it a stain, a danger to their future, a wound that needed to be cleansed. One night, while Soraya and Jacob sat near the edge of the training ground, sharpening their weapons and listening to the quiet wind, Herrick moved through the shadows with two loyal followers. They carried a small vial, glowing with dark energy, something forbidden, something drawn from the roots of a dying world. It was meant to burn the bond from inside, meant to end a joining without breaking the skin. Jacob felt the cold before he saw the danger. The air changed around him, a sharp taste on his tongue, and his skin rose. In warning, he turned just in time to see a figure near the food tent, pouring something into his water skin. He moved fast, tackled the figure, and rolled with him across the ground, weapons drawn, and guards shouting. The light revealed a young warrior with sharp eyes and trembling hands, who looked more afraid than deadly. Soraya arrived with her blade drawn, her voice slicing through the noise. Like a blade through silk, she demanded truth, and the boy spoke quickly, his voice cracking with fear. He told of Herrick's orders of the dark poison meant for the outsider, and how the law had to be protected at any cost. Silence fell heavy over the camp, and the Elder Council was summoned. Herrick stood before them without fear, his eyes locked on Soraya, and then on Jacob. He spoke of tradition, of the blood oath, of the danger of letting a human hold the soul blade, and bond with the heir too. Their line. Soraya stepped forward, her voice calm but filled with power. "The law chose him," she said. "The blade chose him, and I will not see my people destroy what the stars themselves have written." The elders debated until dawn, their voices low, but fierce, and when the first light touched the stone walls, the verdict was made. Herok was stripped of title, and exiled, his name removed from the memory stones. His followers, scattered in shame and silence, Jacob sat by the fire that night, the air cool and the stars bright above him. Saraya approached without armor, her steps quiet, her hands at her sides. She sat beside him without a word for a long time. They watched the flames move and the shadows dance. "You could have died tonight," she said, her voice barely louder than the fire crackle. "I could have," he answered, "but I didn't." She looked at him then, not with anger, not with pity, just with eyes that saw through the smoke and the silence. "You should hate us for what they tried," she said. "And yet you stay." "I stay because I want to understand," he said, "because something tells me this is where I need to be." Saraya reached into her cloak and pulled out a stone carved with the symbol of her clan and placed it in his hand. It glowed faintly. As he touched it, warm and steady, "This means you are not just a bonded mate," she said. "It means you are one of us, now whether the stars like it or not." Jacob closed his hand around the stone and nodded. The fire reflected in his eyes, and the mark on his hand pulsed again like a second heart, and in that quiet night filled with betrayal, truth, and a strange beginning, neither of them spoke the word bond, but both felt it stronger than ever, like roots growing beneath stone, like light in the deep earth waiting to rise. The early sun poured golden light over the valley as Jacob stood shirtless by the stream, sweat running down his back as he trained with a heavier blade, one made of Kerelian stone, not meant for humans, but he had grown used to its weight. Saraya watched from the shade, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She had been the one to bring him this blade 3 mornings ago. Without a word, just a look and a nod. Since then he had not gone back to the wooden ones. The others had started calling him something new, not outsider, not human, not even bonded, but Vixa, which meant one who walks beside fire. It was not a title given lightly, and he knew it came from how he and Saraya now moved together in training, matched in pace and breath, even when they did not speak, but words were starting to come more often, small ones, short ones, sometimes shared while sharpening weapons, sometimes spoken over meals, and once whispered during a quiet walk through the whispering trees where strange birds sang and glowing moss lit their steps. Saraya was still not soft with him, but the edge in her voice had dulled. She no longer walked away when he came near that evening. As the camp rested under the light of twin moons, Saraya called him to the circle. Not to fight, not to train, but to talk. Her tone was calm, and her eyes serious. They sat on stone benches carved long ago by her people's symbols, etched into the seat, told stories. Jacob could not read, but he felt their weight all the same. "You never asked what this bond means to us," she said, her fingers tracing one of the symbols. "It is not just law or old ways. It is our soul's echo. It is a link that lasts past blood, past time, past war." Jacob listened quietly, unsure if he was ready to hear what came next, but unwilling to turn away. "When I was born," she said, "the stars marked me. They said I would lead. They said I would fight. They said I would choose one who could carry the fire with me, but I never believed that one would be human. I never believed I would be here either," Jacob said, "but here we are." She looked at him then, not with heat, not with cold, just with truth and breath and silence between words. "That day on the field when you picked up my blade," she said, "something changed. I hated you for it, not because you were weak, but because you made me feel seen, and I did not want to be seen, not then, not by someone like you." Jacob nodded slowly, the memory still fresh in his mind, the way her eyes had widened, the way her voice had trembled when she said the bond was real. "You asked why I picked it up," he said. "The answer is simple. I could not let you fall. You were fighting alone, and it felt wrong to walk away." Saraya's gaze softened just a little, and she reached for something in her cloak, a small piece of metal shaped like a leaf. She placed it in his hand and closed his fingers around it. "My brother wore this before he fell in the Eastern Pass." She said, "He was strong, proud, fierce, and kind. You remind me of him, not in strength, not in skill, but in spirit, and that is harder to find." Jacob held the charm gently, its edges smooth, its shape simple, yet heavy with meaning. "Thank you," he said, unsure what else to offer, unsure if words could match the weight of her gift. They rose from the bench together and walked through the camp, the firelight casting long shadows, the smell of stew in the air, voices low and tired. Saraya stopped near the training stones and turned to face him again. "Tomorrow a test awaits," she said, "not a trial by blade, but a walk through the stone path where the old fire burns, where the bond must be shown not through talk, but through silence, through presence, through truth." Jacob did not know what the stone path was, but he nodded without hesitation. If this was part of her world, part of their bond, he would face it without fear. She placed her hand briefly on his chest over his heart, and her voice dropped to a whisper. "Do not pretend to be strong there," she said. "The Path sees past lies, just walk and let it see you. Then she walked away, her steps, light, her cloak trailing behind her like smoke in wind. Jacob stood alone by the fire, holding the leaf charm, feeling its warmth, and thinking about the way she looked at him now, not as a stranger, not as a burden, not even as a mistake, but as something becoming real. He sat by the fire that night, sharpening his blade, watching the flames dance, and wondering what the path would show him, what it would show her, and whether it would bind them tighter or break them apart. The mark on his hand glowed faintly, and the charm in his pocket hummed like a heartbeat made of metal and memory, and something more he could not yet name. The wind changed that morning, as a horn echoed from the ridge, a sound that had not been heard in many cycles, a sound that chilled even the oldest warriors to the bone. Jacob stepped out of his tent with the leaf charm tied to his wrist, and his blade already in hand. He saw the warriors gathering near the stone circle, their faces tight, their eyes locked on the horizon where black smoke curled into the sky. Soraya stood in full armor, her expression unreadable, her eyes darker than he had ever seen. The clan elders were already speaking in hushed voices, passing tokens and signs of war. One of them stepped forward and raised a burning branch over the flames in the center of the circle. The light flared and changed color, turning blue, then green, then deep crimson. "He comes, the elder," said his voice rough with fear, "the one who defied the blade, the one who wants what is not his. He comes for her, and he comes for the human." Soraya's hands tightened around her twin blades. Jacob stepped beside her, ready to fight, but unsure of what the enemy truly was. She looked at him then, and spoke in a voice that did not shake. "His name is Valor," she said. "Once he stood as one of us, then he broke the bond with violence, and tried to steal the blade from his chosen. He was cast out and marked, but he did not die. He rose again with fire, and those who believe his path is stronger than the law." Jacob asked what Valor wanted now, though he already knew from the way Soraya avoided his eyes, from the way the elders stared at the mark on his hand. "He sent a message this morning," she said, her voice steady. "Give me the outsider, and I will leave your people unharmed. Refuse, and I take the girl and burn your home to ash." Silence fell over the warriors. Some looked to Soraya, some looked to Jacob, others looked to the sky, as if searching for guidance in the stars above. Jacob took one step forward and looked at Soraya without flinching. "Then we fight," he said, "not for the bond, not for the blade, but for you." She did not speak right away, but when she did, her words were quiet and strong. "You will not stand alone," she said. "You walk beside fire, and today fire rises." Preparations began fast. Walls strengthened, weapons sharpened, scouts sent beyond the trees. Jacob and Soraya trained side by side. Each movement matched, each breath shared. They had fought before, but never like this now. They moved like a storm in rhythm, like flame and shadow. That night, before the battle, the two sat together in the stone chamber. Where the soul blade rested, it still shimmered, even while asleep, its light faint but alive. Soraya reached for it, and placed it between them, her fingers brushing the edge, her eyes fixed on the glow. "This blade bound us," she said, "not by choice, but by law. But today we fight not as strangers, not as victims of fate, but as to who choose to stand as one." Jacob nodded and touched the blade gently. The mark on his hand burned softly in reply. At dawn, Valor came with his army, dark armor, strange weapons, beasts that roared from behind blackened cages. His voice rang out over the battlefield, sharp and cruel. "Give me the human, and I will spare the rest. Give me the girl, and I will make her mine, as she was always meant to be." Soraya stepped forward, her voice clear and loud. "I am no prize," she said. "I am no property, and I am not yours." Jacob stood beside her and lifted the Curelian blade high, its glow matching the light in his eyes. "Then come and take us," he said. The battle that followed shook the valley. Stone cracked under boots and screams rang through the trees. Jacob and Soraya fought together, every strike, every block, every move, in sync. The bond between them, not just glowing now, but blazing. The warriors around them followed their lead, pushing back the tide, holding the line, even when hope began to thin. Valor himself stepped into the fight, his power dark, his blade black as night. He moved like lightning, but Jacob met him without fear. Their blades clashed in a burst of energy, and Soraya moved in from the side, striking fast and fierce. They fought him together, step by step, strike by strike, until the final blow came, not from anger, not from rage, but from unity. Two blades crossed in perfect rhythm, ending the darkness that had threatened to take everything. When it was over, the field was quiet, the fires dimmed, and the wounded gathered. Jacob stood with blood on his arms, and Soraya leaned against him, her strength nearly gone, but her spirit unbroken. The elders came and knelt before them, not just in thanks, but in recognition. The bond had saved them, not just law, not just fire, but the will to stand together. As night fell, Soraya and Jacob stood on the same stone bench, where they once spoke of fear and fate. Now they stood as something else, not strangers, not enemies, not even bound by old words. She took his hand and looked at him with eyes full of light. "You are not just the one who drew my blade," she said. "You are the one who made me believe." In the bond and in the silence between stars, they stood hand in hand, as the soul blade behind them glowed brighter than ever before. The fire burned low in the center of the great hall, while the clan gathered in silence, their heads bowed, their weapons laid at their sides. The battle was won, but the wounds were deep, and the air still carried the scent of smoke and sorrow. Jacob stood near the circle with Soraya beside him, her shoulder wrapped in cloths, her blade resting across her back, her eyes fixed on the flame that now danced in shades of gold and silver, a rare light, said to appear only when a sacred path had been walked with truth. The soul blade was placed on the stone altar again, its glow steady, its edges untouched by war. It had been drawn by a human, touched by hands not of Kirel. Yet it had not shattered, had not burned. Instead, it had blazed brighter than the stars above. And now the elders spoke not with fear, but with respect, their voices calm, their words chosen with care. "The bond once feared is now honored," said the High Elder. "The blade has chosen, and the path has been walked. The fire did not consume it, revealed." Jacob said nothing as he listened to the old voices echo across the stone walls. He felt the mark on his hand pulse softly, not a burn, not a warning, just a reminder of what had been endured, and what had been forged, not with law, not with tradition, but with choice and trial and blood. Soraya turned to him, then, her face no longer hiding what she had kept inside for so long, her voice low but clear. "When I first saw you, I saw weakness. When you drew the blade, I saw a threat. When you stood beside me in battle, I saw truth, and now I see more than I ever thought I would." He looked at her and felt the weight of every moment since that day on the battlefield, where fire and blood first tied their fates. He saw her not just as a warrior, not just as the keeper of a sacred line, but as someone who had opened her world to him piece by piece, blade by blade, breath by breath. Next morning, the sun rose with soft light and warm winds. The clan began rebuilding, walls mended, tents raised, children laughed again, and the training circle echoed once more with strikes and shouts. But this time, Jacob trained not as the outsider, not as the mistake, but as one of them, his name spoken without pause, his presence no longer questioned. Trained beside him, her movements sharp, her laughter rare but real. They no longer needed words to move as one, they no longer needed to explain the bond. It was in every step, in every glance, in every breath they shared. Later that day, the clan prepared a ceremony, not of joining, not of blood, but of honor. The stone path was lit with glowing moss, the soul blade placed once more at its end, and the elders stood in a circle as Jacob and Soraya stepped forward, hand in hand, not because they were told, not because of the law, but because the bond had grown beyond rules, beyond fear. The elder spoke once more, his voice slow with meaning. "The stars write paths, but hearts choose the way. The blade has burned in both, and neither have broken. And so we witness, not a law fulfilled, but a choice made." Jacob stepped forward and placed his hand on the soul blade. It glowed beneath his touch. Then Soraya did the same, and the blade sang with light, the glow rising into the sky above where the stars blinked once, then held steady, as if watching with silent approval. That night the feast lit the valley, fires burned high, and music filled the air. Warriors danced, children played, and the old ones sang stories of battle and bond, of pain and strength, of how a human drew the sacred blade, and instead of death found unity and hope. Jacob sat beside Soraya, watching the flames, listening to the songs, his body sore, his heart full. She leaned against him for the first time, not as a warrior, not as an heir, but as someone who had chosen him, and been chosen in return. "Do you still think the bond was a mistake?" he asked, his voice light with a hint of a smile. She smiled back, her eyes soft like the flame before dawn. She said, "I think it was the start of everything. We were meant to be." And as the stars shimmered above and the soul blade rested in peace, the world seemed quiet for a moment. Not because there was no war, not because there was no pain, but because something rare had been found, something that began with fire and ended with faith. The bond was real, the bond was earned, and the bond had saved not just them, but all who now danced beneath the twin moons of Kirel, where the sacred blade slept, and the future waited in light and silence and love.